let's talk about crime and punishment now. The manifestos haven't come out yet, that's next week, but we've got a taster of what might be in the Tory manifesto. Rishi Sunak is planning to pledge a massive overhaul of homicide laws, which will see longer sentences imposed on domestic abusers and could lead to a US-style system of first and second-degree murder. Minimum sentences for murders which take place in the home will increase from 15 to 25 years. And the Prime Minister will also pledge a review of the current distinction between manslaughter and murder, which could lead to more killers being convicted of the more serious crime. To discuss this is lawyer and legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg, KC. Lovely to see you this evening, Mr. Rosenberg. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining me. What's your reaction to this? Because I must admit, I read it and sort of scratched my head. So we've got a system where prisons are overcrowded, in fact, so overcrowded that the former Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, is having to release prisoners early. We've also got a court system that doesn't seem to have caught up with the COVID backlog. And now Rishi Sunak is pledging to put people in prison for even longer. I mean, I can understand why victims and their family would welcome this, but is it practical?
If you're a politician and you're increasing sentences, you know that you won't be around, and I'm not talking about the impending election, you won't be around when the additional sentence is served in 10 or 20 years' time. And maybe they'll have sorted out the prisons by then, although don't hold your breath. The real question is whether an increased minimum term is going to make any difference. Is it going to deter somebody from killing if they think they're going to get a minimum term of around 25 years instead of a minimum term of 15 years? Don't forget, if you're convicted of murder, you have to be sentenced to imprisonment for life. And we're talking about the time when you're considered for parole. Yes. Do murderers think about that? I wonder.
I mean, I think from the public's perspective, there's always been this case for saying life should mean life. And anyone in the legal professions knows that it doesn't. It doesn't mean that you're banged up behind bars for the rest of your life. As you say, there are minimum terms you have to serve, and then you're considered for parole. I'm wondering whether you think in general, however, that actually those life terms for murder are too low. I mean, 25 years sounds to me to be fairer than, say, 15. You've taken somebody's life in cold blood, and you might be considered for release after just 15 years? Doesn't strike me as enough, Joshua.
That's a perfectly fair position. The question, however, is what happens if you commit 2 murders, 3 murders, a terrorist attack, 10 people are killed, 20 people, 50. We do have an increasing number of people who are given what's called a whole life term. Then, of course, they have very little incentive. Nothing to stop them killing another prisoner, nothing to stop them killing a prison officer. They're not going to spend any more time in prison. And if you give the maximum possible sentence for a relatively small number of killings, what do you do for a terrorist?
Yes. Do you think that the distinction that he's now trying to draw and to make the law clearer on manslaughter and murder is perhaps in response to the case of Valdo Callacane, the Nottinghamshire killer, who the family of the victims, or the families of the victims, the 3 victims, the 2 students and then the older gentleman, they were saying that they had no idea that it was going to be a manslaughter charge and not a murder one. And they felt very disappointed that as a consequence, and yes, it was decided that Callacane had mental health problems, and it was decided that, you know, his mental health affected his behaviour, but they felt very disappointed by the sentence he received. And indeed, we read this week that there aren't enough psychiatric prison places either.
There are major problems, as you say, in the whole prison estate. I think they were upset. I don't think that and this is what the subsequent inquiry has established, I don't think they were kept fully informed by the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, in terms of the sentence, I strongly suspect that Callacane will die in prison or in the mental hospital, high-security hospital that he's been sent to. He's very ill, and it doesn't look to me as if he's going to be released anytime soon. The situation is that he can only be released if the Justice Secretary or a court called the First Tribunal concludes that he no longer poses a risk to the public, and it's pretty unlikely that that will happen. But what the family are understandably concerned about is that he was convicted, as you say, of manslaughter rather than murder. Now, manslaughter is less serious than murder. If you're convicted of manslaughter, you don't have to receive a life sentence. If you're convicted of murder, you do. And what the Law Commission, the independent body that advises the government on reform of the law, recommended as long ago as 2006 is this reorganization that Rishi Sunak seems to be talking about at the moment. There would be first-degree murder, that's unlawful killings with an intention to kill or cause really serious harm, that's murder as it is at the moment. Then there would be second-degree murder, unlawful killings with an intent to cause serious harm, with an intent to cause injury or fear or risk of injury. And this is where Callaghan comes into the story, cases which would otherwise be first-degree murder, but for the fact that the accused successfully pleads provocation, diminished responsibility, or that this was a suicide pact, and that reduces murder to manslaughter. And then there would still be manslaughter, but that would be confined to killings caused by acts of gross negligence, or perhaps by a criminal act that was intended to cause injury, or a criminal act foreseen as involving a serious risk of some injury. So this would be a reorganization. You would have more people convicted of murder and fewer people convicted of manslaughter.
Joshua Rosenberg, thank you very much indeed for sharing your wisdom and experience on legal matters this evening. Great to have you.